Coach Isaiah Wright, how are we doing on this fine Wednesday?
Hey Gabe, how we doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you hopping on, and we're honored that you're joining us on a big day in the NBA. We got NBA Draft Day, so thanks for making the time.
Yeah, it's a lot of work over the last year, and then specifically, the last month and a half for us with all the guys coming out to see us and working out. So it all leads up to tonight, and we'll see where we land and who we get.
I feel like a lot of times we talk about the season, in-season maintenance, off-season training, things like that. I don't think we usually talk a lot about what it's like being a strength conditioning coach on draft night. So maybe can you give us some insight into like what your routine is for today? What's going on? What do you have, workouts? What's happening?
Yeah, so, I think it's changed a little bit. A few years ago when staffs weren't as large, then I would be kind of in the war room, just available with measurements and things like that. And then as the staff's gotten bigger, we have our director of performance who pretty much is in there, and he has everything that we've compiled over the last 2 months, and he's got all of his sheets out ready to answer any questions that might come up. And he's sort of our representative for our team, and I get to sit back in the weight room and get a little workout in and watch the show happen.
I'm picturing you with your clipboard saying like, is it 6'9" or 6'7"? Which one is it, coach?
Yeah. No, I think, back then it was like when I first started, it was more, we didn't have as much of like an in-house database. We didn't have sort of the tech available. And so a lot of it was printing out the Excel sheets and having our list with notes and different things that we've kind of compiled. And now it's all in one place. They've been going over everything for a long time. And so their front office has everything that we need, but then also we have our rep there just to make sure if there's any questions that pop up, then he's available to answer. And it's fun for us now. It's a little less stressful. I don't have to sit in a room with all the big wigs. I get to hang out with my colleagues and kind of watch where everything lands.
Okay, well, which pick do you have this year?
So right now we have five, and then we have a later first round pick at 21, and then we've got a couple second round picks. So we're going to be hopefully active tonight, and I think we've done our homework.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that we're doing this episode. It's so unique to be able to do this episode on this day and have it recorded prior and probably published after. So anyway, we really appreciate your time and thank you so much. And just one more question on that. So I know we had a chance to see each other at the NBA Combine the last few years. Tell me, like, what has this process been like from a strength conditioning standpoint leading up to this? You have your players that are now kind of on break from the season, but now you're bringing in this fresh batch of young talent, people you're considering, players you're considering drafting. Like, what kind of work are you putting in right now to prepare for this?
Yeah, so it's extensive. We have now our set, let's say, tests and things like that from the ones that we do at the combine, but as well as in-house testing. And so a lot of that is six guys come in at a time, and we pretty much start with them right off the bat. We'll recollect any measurements, fill in any gaps that we may have, and then we'll add to our data set by adding in any of the in-house testing and things like that. And the biggest thing for me is really getting an opportunity to see these guys one-on-one. We met them at the combine, and now it's a chance to maybe explore their personalities a little bit, see how they've either improved or, areas that we were maybe concerned about or, had some follow-up ideas about. We get to dive into that a little bit deeper. So it's nice. You get to experience a little bit of one-on-one time with them, learn a little bit more about their background, their training background, things that they've been exposed to at their previous colleges or international coaches and things like that. And so we get to kind of dive deeper into who they are as a person.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing all that. And you mentioned in-house testing, and I think we're going to have the opportunity later in this conversation to talk more about testing and data and really what has changed over the years. Um, During your time in the NBA as a strength conditioning coach. But I would love to kind of go back to your early days in the NBA because you have somewhat of a unique story relative to many others. My understanding is you started in 2005, correct, as a team attendant. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So I was 16 years old back then, and upwards, that was almost 20 years ago now, starting this off season. And I was fortunate enough to get on with the equipment staff. I was the only rookie team attendant at the time, so there was a lot of duties that fell on me in terms of just kind of the busy work, doing towels, doing water, those things. It was fun because I got a front row seat to Kevin Durant's first game. That's the one that stands out in particular. Guys, that pretty much have kind of come and gone in the league, and got to see a firsthand experience of just what it all was like, back then, and getting to kind of learn a lot more about the NBA. And at the time, we hosted one of the only summer leagues. It was called the Rocky Mountain Review. So that was kind of fun because none of this was all televised at the time. I think they started maybe televising it towards my second or third year, but it was fun because I dove right in and just got to get my hands wet with any tasks that they had for me, and I really enjoyed the process. Even at the time of being 16, I was like, this is amazing. I get to see these professional athletes up close. And I get to look at different, approaches from different teams, and just how big of a it is.
That's so cool. And I think early on, right? So you started 2005. I think you had a pretty epic playoff series around then, right? With maybe Golden State, right? Like the Golden State
Yeah,
one
yeah,
and Utah. What was that
yeah.
like 07?
Yeah, that was 2007.
The Baron Davis led Warriors.
So yeah, and what was it? There was the big dunk, I think, that Baron
Yeah.
Davis had
Yeah.
on Andre Kirilenko, but that was the I Believe team, so that was kind of cool to see them. They had a few other big name guys, but yeah, they upset Dallas Mavericks in the first round.
Right.
We ended up beating Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming in the first round.
Wow.
So some of our players were Carlos Boozer, Darren Williams, Ronnie Brewer, Mehmet Okur, some of these guys that,
Such a great team.
it was a really great team. The best thing I think was I was still a little bit younger to understand, but they loved playing for each other. It was a really great group in terms of led by, legendary coach Jerry Sloan. So I got
Wow.
to see that up close and personal, and so it was sort of fun to be part of that, but also be on the outskirts.
No, no question. I mean, I remember watching that series. I remember watching that dunk. That was like a really
Yeah.
memorable thing. Now, I think you got them in the series though. So,
Well, I think yeah, we ended up winning that, but I definitely think we asked our equipment manager. I'll probably get shamed by some colleagues for this, but I remember asking my equipment manager. I was like, "Can you, I think it was game four or game five back in Golden State, and every fan had, it was like a clapper, but it was a fold up picture of Baron Davis dunking on Andre from earlier on, and I was like, any chance you can get one of those?" And I actually have that signed by Baron Davis at my house.
oh, that's cool. That's super cool. All right. Well, good. Nice to go down, NBA memory lane. And so I'm curious, you started as a team attendant, but then made that transition into strength and conditioning. So what was the inspiration for making that leap into strength conditioning?
Well, I think at the time in high school when I was working for the Jazz, then we had a really great sports medicine program. It was sort of like a rudimentary athletic training program. And I just thought, wow, there's actually kind of a career in this, or at least maybe a path between my experience working with the team, but then also this hands-on experience that I got in high school. I think I wanted to kind of follow that path a little bit, and over time it transitioned from more athletic training to more strength and conditioning side. At the time there was really only two trainers and one strength coach. Staffs weren't very big, and I thought, this might be something that I wanted to do. And then after observing the trainers a lot, it was like, I don't really want to work with broken athletes or injured athletes. I'd prefer to work with the performance side, and how to get these guys better. And so it just kind of led me down asking more questions. I started to ask our equipment manager, who kind of put us where we needed to be during game times. I started asking him, like, hey, can I work the visitor locker room a little bit more, or work on the visitor side, just so I could learn more about different teams? And it really fueled my ambitions to kind of head down this path. And I realized, they were doing a lot of work with minimal equipment, and it was just something that really intrigued me.
Yeah. That's so cool. And like I mentioned earlier on, a really unique way to kind of break into the field of strength conditioning. And you've had a front row seat to how the NBA has really evolved over the years from this older school approach in the maybe early 2000s, late 90s to a highly data driven, individualized strategy that we see today. So, can you kind of compare and contrast what you've seen in the earlier days until to what you're experiencing now?
Yeah, I think with any field, the biggest difference is just technology availability. I think, when I first started, I think maybe we had a 15-foot by 15-foot room with minimal equipment to prepare the guys for the game, and it was whatever you could find in the hallways on the road and things like that. Now it's so much more about, we have a weight room space that's designated, we have equipment that's mandated. So that's a big difference, is just the equipment availability, space availability, and technology. And I think back then it was a lot more of, let's say, I think the training level of where the players were was a lot more traditional strength conditioning, whereas now I think a lot of guys are used to getting table work done and working with physiotherapists and working with PTs and things like that. And so some of the changes from that would be, a lot more heavier lifts and traditional lifts on game days now. Whereas back then, I think it was sort of like, oh, we can't really lift heavy. It's game day. We can't do this. And now that more research is out there, and realizing, the preparation that goes into a game and the demands on a game, you have to do the heavy lifting. You have to do some sort of priming. You have to do something throughout the game day to prep you for the demands of the sport. And I think that's just kind of the difference. The information that we have now is so much better in terms of preparing these guys to go out there and perform.
It's funny because it feels like some of that existed with some organizations, right?
Yeah, and
Like you
and
have the Al Vermeil day. Like Al Vermeil would be like, "Yeah, like Isaiah, you got it
absolutely.
right."
Absolutely. And I think, case by case, across the board, I wouldn't say, nobody lifted on game days and stuff
Sure.
like that. It was just more, this guy likes to do it, so that's what we're going to do, or this athlete is used to doing it. So I think now it's more, we know that it works for everybody. We know that we have to do some sort of preparation work. And so it's more of a systematic approach, right? I think when I first started, I observed, one thing that I remember observing in the visiting locker room was like Kobe. He had his team, and it was, I'm going to do this prep work with Judy, and then I'm going to do this prep work, and I'm going to go see the athletic trainer, and then I'm going to lift before the game. I think those guys had their routines down and had things dialed in. Whereas before, it's sort of they came with what they, knew worked for their bodies. Whereas now we're teaching these guys new ways to get their bodies prepared, and I think that might be a little bit of a difference, is now it's more, you have to do something before the game. We talk to a lot of our athletes about why we're doing it, and what, activation exercises or what lifts we might be doing before the game, and try to inform them on, you know, how they're going to see the benefits.
Yeah, you mentioned having some mandated equipment, and there's a lot of things I actually want to dive into with what you're saying. But you mentioned that now you have some mandated equipment. It seems like to me, on the outside looking in, there's also a lot more collaboration amongst NBA strength and conditioning coaches. I know you guys have the association; you guys do a great job with that. So it seems like across the board, there's more communication between organizations too and colleagues. Can you, for someone who's listening in, who maybe is curious what this mandated equipment is in your facilities. Can you maybe shine some light on that?
Yeah, so I want to say maybe about 8 to 10 years ago, I remember doing a like a single leg Bulgarian on a folding chair my first year. And it was in a dirty hallway. The guys couldn't get on the ground. It was just with, I traveled with two giant husky crates that were full of medicine balls and different things, because there was just no standard set. And the NBSCA has done a good job of working together with the league and the Players Association in terms of, we have to have some sort of consistency. I think we're going to be training on the road a lot. We're going to be getting a lot of our main lifts during game days. And so to better, level the playing field, we have to come up with some sort of list. And so I think our association's done a good job of kind of leading that charge, and we've gotten the support from the NBA and the PA, of course. But it starts with two sets of power blocks, just some sort of consistency where we know we're going to have some weight and some medicine balls and physio balls and bands and things like that. And now, the last 2 to 3 years, we've even pressed it forward to you have to have a designated actual space where it's clean, where it's going to be maintained, where we have, the guys able to get, and it's private, where we can actually prepare and plan these lifts, knowing that we're going to have certain equipment. And we're definitely afforded the opportunity just by talking to different colleagues and things like that of maybe getting ahead of it, knowing that we might need something specific and reaching out to them and saying, hey, is this possible to get this in the weight room? We know it's not on, the list of mandated things. And a lot of times, most of the colleagues try to help each other out because we understand that we're all in the same position. We're all trying to prepare our athletes the best we can. And so having some sort of standard is really great because we just can prepare so much more for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of what stood out to me from what you were saying earlier was teaching and the education side. Have you seen a big difference between people entering the league in the mid 2000s to younger players who are now entering the league, between like how much educating and maybe hand holding, but I'm going to really say educating that you've had to do with these young players?
Yeah, I think, the interesting thing is they're all very well versed with like the latest tech. And so, getting a guy to jump on force plates back then probably was a bigger deal, right? Is this going to be used against me for contract reasons? Is this going to be, shared with the front office? And now everybody kind of knows, no, this is just something we can do to help monitor different changes and movement patterns and things like that. And so a lot of the education comes from behind they've seen it, but they just don't really know what we do with it, right? And so I think with some of these younger players, they're excited about what are we doing that's specific to me? What are we doing that can really help me in my development? And so we try to use some of the different things that we may have available for them to show them this is what we're doing with it. It's not going to be held against you. It's not, but participation, and the more that you buy into what we're doing, the more information we can share with you and the better we can develop our plan to, progress you further along in your career. And, in terms of that education piece, they're coming in with a background of different styles of strength conditioning and different types of lifts that they may be exposed to. They're all basketball players and we're all basketball strength coaches. So there are some similarities, but also at the same time, different approaches and different things that they may have seen. We try to educate them on just, what can we do to help them?
Sounds to me like the change from more general training, team oriented style of training into what is now a modern day. This is kind of all about individualization now. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
correct? Yeah.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. I think they're so used to maybe in the college setting, okay, I'm in group A because I'm a junior or senior, right? And that means that I am going to be working out with these guys. And we try to do more of an approach where it's like they may all be in the weight room at the same time, but there are 3 to 4 different things that are specific to you. At the end of the day, you're all basketball players and we need to train, but we have to figure out what works well for them as well. I think a lot of times there might be, I've talked to different players and they have one strength coach for the 20 guys that are on the basketball team. So guys, unless they're the top one or two, might not be getting the attention to detail that we're trying to dive into and we're trying to provide for them. And I think at the same side too, we're a younger team, so part of what we're trying to do too is try to get them to work together and push each other from that perspective, push each other on development and things like that. So we do have a lot of group workouts where it might be all the rookies coming in at once, and we're just doing a lot of the fundamentals, things that they may have either glossed over or been afforded the ability to skip over because their athletic ability is just such a high standard.
It's funny. I was just I literally this morning had the same exact conversation with an athlete I was working with, a basketball athlete, talking about what it was like being a collegiate strength and conditioning coach. And of course, you want to have all this individualization, and we work our hardest to do that. But with that, we also have the constraints of a schedule and hours and weight room availability, and you really do your best to individualize it as much as you can within these constraints that you have. So it's just funny that that kind of resurfaced and we're having this conversation now. My question to you is, you've been around now for like 20 years. So I feel like the athletes that were around in the early 2000s and before that came up playing a lot of sports. Like the multi-sport athlete, Bo Jackson's, like Deion Sanders, like that was very prevalent. And then AAU really picked up in the early 2000s, and that became a driving force in basketball development. And at least speaking from my own experience, when I was at in the college setting, I saw a lot of athletes that weren't really great movers, that were basketball athletes. And I know I can speak for college strength and conditioning coaches. When we get new recruits, 18-year-olds, a lot of them aren't the best movers. Some of that can be attributed to, sure, the individual, but they didn't really play multiple sports. They played AAU all year round, basketball, basketball, basketball. And now I feel like, the scale is tipping back the other way, and that we're starting to see the world, high school, people encourage multi-sport athletes again. So I'm just curious, have you noticed anything over the years? Have you seen this arc of like people coming into you at the level that you're at in terms of quality of movement or performance, anything related to that?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it spot on. We actually administer sort of a sports specialization questionnaire as part of our pre-draft process just to understand, okay, this guy played soccer or this guy did baseball and there's certain physical attributes that come with playing those sports and when did they stop? Was it right before high school? Was it during high school? So what level of experience at those different sports do they have? And to you nailed it. I think we basketball athletes physically have different attributes than other sport athletes, right? Generally taller, longer levers, things like that, right? And so most of them have somewhat been pigeonholed where it's like, oh, hey, you have to put all your chips in this basket because you are 6'8". And sometimes that might not necessarily be the decision that they wanted to make at the time, but that's just sort of the path that was chosen for them and that they decided to head down. And so we start to see a little bit of a pendulum swing. I'd say these last couple, 3 to 4 seasons, just with the understanding that playing the same sport year round is not going to make you a better mover. It's not going to make you a more efficient athlete. And so I think the trade-off becomes, the difficult part about that is the trade-off is a lot of these AAU teams and competitive competition teams, they won't let you play other sports year round.
Right,
So
right.
you have to kind of commit to playing with this team, otherwise you aren't on that team. And so we definitely have seen a little bit of a pendulum swing, but our sport being the nature that it is of just taller, bigger guys. Most of them do have some sort of sport specialization once they're maybe 14 years and on, because I think just due to where they are at physically at that time, most of the guys kind of decide, hey, basketball is the best route to make it to the next level of college or wherever your goals may be. So we are facing that. Like we just had all of our young guys in for the last 6 weeks, and most of it was very basic, like, how do we make you a better athlete, right? Because you can do all of these things with a basketball in your hands, but you can't skip rope for 20 seconds, and you can't hop over, and your change of direction is really non-efficient and somewhat scary. And that's the thing that we're trying to teach them is they've sort of skipped those steps in terms of sheer athleticism development. And so we're trying to dive into, great, you're a really great basketball player. We believe that if we make you a better overall, you know, better robust athlete, it will translate on the court.
Yeah, no question. No question. I mean, I think I had a somewhat of an eye-opening experience when I was at Texas. A lot of the kids that were recruited in state, they all played football, no matter what sport they were playing now. If they were a baseball player, they played football. If they were a basketball player, they played football. And some of them ran track, and we had an athlete, Kerwin Roach, who I think there's like a video of him taking a sticker and slapping on the top of the backboard, like he basically could clear a vertimax, a vert jump. And it just got me thinking, it got me thinking. And we've heard so much over the years about these Bo Jackson type people. And I feel like that really, really went away. But I can see, I work with high school athletes now. I have conversations with high school sport coaches. That has kind of made a resurgence. And I know in the NFL during the Super Bowl every year, they always put the rosters out of who played multiple sports. And there's always some article that comes out, which is super cool and nice to see. I'm curious to know, with the influx of more European basketball players, is there any difference that you've seen culturally from lifting weights and performance to those that you see with American athletes?
Yeah, I think that's a huge topic internally for us, and as well as why the league is trying to expand where it is. And you look at the last, what is it, six MVPs have been non-US born players, right? And I think the biggest difference is not only are they maybe more physically prepared or more trained, let's just say, I maybe can't make that jump or assumption, but I think the biggest difference is they are so used to having the bare bones, so used to having to do, different sports, having to work out in gyms that really are what we would call not up to quality. And I think what some of that drives and fuels some of these international athletes a little bit more, knowing that, like, wow, we're afforded this opportunity with all these different facilities and all these different practitioners. We have to use them, and it's sort of one of those trade-offs where the US guys at AAU and things like that, they may, we don't put a larger emphasis on training and things like that. And so the training age that we see the international guys come at is much higher level than some of the US guys. And I think I mentioned it earlier, a lot of US born basketball players kind of got to skip steps because their skill set was so strong, right? And so inversely, the skill set might not be there for the international players, but the athleticism is, and the development that they have as a foundation is much stronger. So then, when you provide them with the skill coaches and the different facilities and practitioners that we have, they really tend to excel and utilize those.
Yeah, and you mentioned six MVPs in a row, which is pretty amazing. And it's, I think great for the league. But I've heard anecdotally, I don't know if there's any truth to this at all. So I just want to be clear that
Yeah.
I've heard that European athletes, when they throw a ball like a baseball or football, it looks terrible. I mean, but they'll kick anything and it looks very fluid and nice. Whereas Americans, I'm sure when we try to juggle a soccer ball or kick something, it looks ridiculous to them. But we can, everyone can drop back and throw a 20-yard pass. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's fair. A couple years ago, when I was working under Coach Snyder, we had a few different international players, and so as part of our warm-ups, we'd sometimes throw football out there, throw some soccer balls, and just kind of have fun with it a little bit. But yeah, you nailed it. I think, we are so used to. I think the difference may be the coordination utilized in soccer and football internationally speaking. They have tremendous footwork. They have tremendous ability for body control, body awareness, spatial awareness, proprioception. So some of those foundational attributes really translate well when you try to fine tune them versus this person can throw a football 60 yards, but you know, he can't juggle a soccer ball, as you said, where it's like, well, footwork is huge in basketball,
Hmm.
so you would think that that would be inversely, but I think it just goes to show that we have a lot of areas in terms of the US, we have a lot of areas that we can still improve by just making them get uncomfortable. I think that's one thing that I try to address with our athletes is like, if you're uncomfortable doing these types of movements or juggling a soccer ball, as you mentioned, chances are if you have to be forced into some of those movements on the court, that's where we get a little nervous and things like that. That's where your body, might be trying to do something that it's not physically able to do versus, the international guys. It's a lot more free flow of the game too. Them growing up, it's a lot more, free flow of youth development internationally. I think they let them play a little bit more, whereas sometimes you'll go to an AAU game and they're running plays and they're 10, 11 years old. And it's like they have no business running plays. They need to be just going out there and exploring movements and being exposed to different stimulus and reacting and things like that. And so I think we've become so rigid with our approach here in the US of like, you have to do this. And then you hire, if you're 10, 11 years old, you hire a development coach and you're going from your basketball practice to your individual development to your, instead of just letting them grow as human beings, letting them grow from the from the human kinetic chain, like just allowing that to naturally happen. And then later on in life, we can kind of, once we reach that top peak, then we sort of refine those skills. So we've had it, I believe we sort of have it inverse.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you mentioned areas of improvement. So my question to you is across the NBA, or you can speak for yourself in your own practice, what do you see as areas of improvement as you move forward in the performance world in the NBA or working with this population? Like, is there something that you're trying to get better at right now? Is there something you see across the league where I'm like, I think we can be a little bit better in this area? I know everyone's really driven to always improve and always evolve. Is there an area to you that you're thinking of, or that you've been working hard on, or you identified as an area of improvement?
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a couple times, but just movement efficiency and movement efficacy and just how each guy as they interact with the ground and what they're doing is so important, right? And what I mean by that is they're so used to taking this amount of jump shots, this amount of right hand dribbles, and it's so structured. And so putting them into different positions where they have to think, where their motor patterns might be different, where we can really, let's say, explore a three-dimensional approach to just what they do out there as athletes is really important. I think spending time doing things like, I think doing things like bear crawl series or things like that, getting them on, ground series and things like that. We've explored that a little bit where it's like they've never done that before. Whereas, maybe 10, 15 years ago, you played football, so you pushed up off the ground. You were used to doing different things. You got knocked down on the ground. And so your body learned to adapt to those different types of things. I think we've been so rigid in you have to get this amount of shots up, you have to get these moves down. And so um, we're not really making them a robust athlete by only exposing them to certain types of movement that are specific to basketball. And so we always kind of look at what does this guy do when we do a hip turn series? Does he have any knee drive? Is it all pushing off from the ankle joint? Is like where can we improve on some of those things that we're going to see on the court? Lateral movement, everybody talks about, oh, he's an efficient lateral mover. Well, okay, he might be good for one step, but what happens when you have to do one step to a drop to taking a charge or taking a bump and then closing out, right? That's a series of 4 to 5 different types of movements that a lot of times they haven't ever been exposed to, whether or not they were in college or not. They might have been the best athlete, so it was just super easy for them. Now they're up against other athletes of their caliber and the speed and the forces that demand on their body, they're not able to withhold because they just haven't had that foundation for so long. So for me, one of the biggest things is when we get our young guys, we try to see how do they move? How can we make that more efficient? How can we make that safer? But also, let's explore what you're not good at, and we have to work on those areas.
So I imagine you rely a lot on your coaching eye, right? What you
Yep.
see in front of you. But my question to you would be, how are you measuring all of this, right? How are you measuring your success? What KPIs are important for you guys as you assess movement quality, movement efficiency?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult part, right? Is it is a lot of the coaching eye, and I think I've been afforded the opportunity. I've got a great staff where, it might sound abnormal for some performance directors, but I hired a strength coach where his background is track and field and football, and then another strength and conditioning coach where his background is basketball and football. And it's like, how can we figure out what's the things that we're looking for, as you mentioned, KPIs with all of our tech that we have. But at the end of the day, I'm utilizing their background and what they've seen from a coach's eye to help us inform maybe what direction and what things we need to test them on. And I think if we had a 3D laboratory with cameras everywhere and force plates everywhere, it would be much easier to put them in these different types of movement patterns. I think, unfortunately, most NBA teams are not afforded that opportunity. We have, our two force plates in the ground, and have our jumps and things like that. And you can take away some really great stuff from that. But I think the quality of the feedback that we're trying to provide for the player really does come from just the experience of our coaches and what they're used to seeing, and we have to kind of continue to run with it. It's definitely a difficult topic because if you ask most of my colleagues around the league, everybody's doing the latest and greatest stuff, but I think, in true fashion, we all are really utilizing our coach's eyes, and we're not really leaning on the tech as much to see how these guys are developing. Obviously, we can put them through our battery of tests and use time as a measurement and things like that, and try to come up with movement profiles from that perspective. But a lot of it too is working with the on-court development coaches, right? What do you want to see from them? Are they bad at getting over screens? Are they bad at um, setting up pick and rolls, hip switches, things like that, things that we can actually really work on a consistent basis. Because the other matter of the fact is, you might go on a road trip for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, and you can't lean on just your battery of tests that you have available at home. You have to utilize the coach's feedback. You have to, lean on a lot of video. I mean, we do a lot of video when guys are doing different things. I'll just film them, and I won't look at it until maybe 2 months later, and then all of a sudden I'll see them do it again, and I'll film it, and we'll put a timeline and overlap next to it, and we'll try to break that down on, look how much lower you are in position here. Look how much quicker you are at switching your hips and getting up and over that screen, and try to get some more buy-in from that perspective.
Absolutely. This theme comes up a lot, which is, and it usually comes up when we talk about collaboration with the actual sport coaches, which is deconstructing movement. So many times a sport coach will say, he needs to do this, he needs to do this. So it's like, okay, well, let's break down what that actually is. Is it a series of movements, like you said? Is it pick and roll footwork on the defensive side, sliding into taking a charge position, something like that? So I think, yeah, deconstructing movement and maybe defining movement, like getting on
Yeah.
the same page in terms of terminology with the sport coaches, that's a big one, right?
It's huge. Yeah, that I think you said it best is, what are we all looking for, and are we using the same terms, right? Because, they said, oh, he needs to be a better lateral mover. Well, on the force plates, he's generating this amount of force, but it's not translating on the court. Okay, so then what comes next? Is it body positioning? Is it physicality? Is it something that is really not measurable? Is it their tenacity to get over the screen that's going to make them a better mover, right? And so trying to figure out what they want to see, what we want to see, and then marrying the two is very difficult, but I think that's what comes with time in terms of working with different staffs is our ability to speak the same language as them is very important, and our ability to also tell them right now that's not measurable, and so we have to either film it, look at it rep after rep. We have to um, maybe figure out a different way to quantify it, but also look at the quality of just what they're doing, because so much of what I remember a couple years back, it was one of those where it's like James Harden had this step back that nobody could guard, right? And all of a sudden he shot 56% from three or whatever it was. What did he do that was so much better? He attacked harder downhill and got a bigger bump? Was it his deceleration? And so just trying to figure out where our athletes are on that spectrum, and just really try to work with the coaches on what they want to see is the difficult part.
Right. And is it an information processing thing? Is it a technical or tactical thing, right? Is this a tactical issue where it's like our force plate readings show that he has the ability to do this? We've seen him actually do this on the court. So he actually is able to do this, but is he processing the information that's needed throughout the context of the game to actually perform this movement over and over and over again, right?
I love that you brought that up
Yeah.
because one of the things that our performance science director, Barnett Frank, he is all about dual task and tri-task exercises, right? So while we're doing these types of movements or even conditioning and things like that, we're trying to throw different stimulus at them
Right.
so that way their processing speed is quicker, their ability to make decisions are quicker, their ability to put themselves in a position that they know that they can generate the most force from, right? And I think that comes with, we call it like the skill acquisition, right? Like how quickly are they able to take what we want them to do from an X's and O standpoint and display it from a physical standpoint. And some guys just unfortunately, kind of what we talked about earlier, from their rigid development, that's a slower process and that's going to take more time versus maybe what we talked about earlier, the international players. They've been afforded those opportunities to be put in those situations, so it's more about the X's and O's and less about the skill acquisition.
Right. I mean, if you watch an NBA game, it's always fun to watch the offense, right? It's fun to watch who's dribbling the ball and who's maybe open. And if you watch an NBA game or a basketball game, what do you notice on defense? Like
Yeah.
their heads are always moving, right?
Yeah.
Always moving. And the really, really great ones, Nikola Jokic, right? Like he kind of knows LeBron James. They know where these people are supposed to be on the floor. They've seen enough film. They've watched the game and they know the tendencies of people. But if you watch defense, it's moving while turning your head over and over and over again and being able to process information as you go. So super cool and glad we hit on that. You mentioned earlier among the movement efficiency, among the quality, you also have these battery of tests. Can you expand on your battery of tests for us? What are your go-to assessments when you have these batch of athletes come in for the first time of the come in for the first time that year? And then how often are you revisiting these tests?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, some of that obviously is probably consistent across the league. I would start with the biomechanics project that's being led up by the NBA, right? So, last year is the first year that we were a beta team. We had the NBA come in and help us add some new tech to our sports science lab. And some of it, I think they decided on is just your standard hands on hips counter movement jump, right? And then also with that, a drop jump. And then we want to dive into maybe a single leg counter movement jump. I think it's, really important to get those types of things and those movement patterns. That's been, across the league sort of decided that consistently, if we watch those over time, that might be the only four tests that we're able to get these guys to do and complete consistently. And they're trying to shoot for four times a year, I believe is what the standard is. We do a lot more testing than that, right? We probably have some of our young guys, just for instance, we have our young guys jump on the force plates every game day. So some of the players that are veterans on our team that might be a little adverse to just how often we're testing, we might be able to get them on the force plates, that 5 to 6 times in a season, hopefully, once every month. But the young guys, we get them every single day or every game day. And a lot of what we're looking at is just um, what's their readiness look like from that perspective? What kind of outputs are we seeing? What kind of, if we're working on specific movements and things like that, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And hopefully that will help guide our training program, knowing that the biggest thing, I'll be honest with you, that we see is giant asymmetries from left to right limb, right? A lot of these guys, just due to the same movement patterns we're looking at, could be 15+% asymmetry on just a standard counter movement jump, right? So to your point, is that a true strength deficit from one limb to another? Is that a compensatory pattern that we're seeing up the chain? So a lot of it when they first come on to our group is let's try to mitigate that a little bit, right? Make sure that they're in some some norms where we feel comfortable, things like that. But then also at the same time, these are $1 million athletes. We're not going to pull somebody out because we see something on a hands-on hips force plate jump. So I think. That's really important. Some of the other stuff that we're doing just in-house is some lower body strength assessments, mid-thigh pull, a belt squat, things like that. I think it's really important to look at, are we improving from that perspective? I know a lot of teams use some different tech where we're looking at specific joint angles based on those asymmetries that you've seen on force plates, right? So it's like, okay, we know there's a deficit here. We know their injury history is A, B, and C. We have to address this because at some point in time in an 82 game season, this is going to be the weakest link in the chain. So how do we address that specifically? And so we do a lot of marrying range of motion numbers to asymmetric testing on a specific limb or specific joint movements. Then we try to get them into the movement pattern. How does that work once they're actually moving? And are we still seeing the same type of theme? And if not, okay, then why? Because we know there's a strength deficit here or a range deficit, then it has to be some sort of movement deficiency that they are not able to put the, display out there and perform out there.
Or a velocity deficit, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the hard part too is these guys are really fast and these guys are really, really, good at doing certain things, all of a sudden you put a demand through, a certain joint or a certain movement, and all of a sudden you can tease that out a little bit, right? And one of your pieces that we utilized a lot for a long time, within the squat rack was just trying to figure out, where are they at on an unloaded squat, with full effort and things like that. And then all of a sudden, okay, we add a little bit of weight to them. What does that look like? That change the pattern? Things like that. Where does rotation come into play, right? Because it's a 3D dimensional sport. We have to figure out that. We have to address that. And I think there's a lot of different things to look at, and the difficult part is finding that consistency to test it and figuring out, what can we truly tease out in a season, and what do we need to kind of table for the off season?
Hmm. And it sounds like you have these more global tests, right? You have a test like a force plate jump, which obviously there's a strong correlation to basketball and the movements that are required in basketball. But then I like what you said, where you now dig deeper a little more locally, like at certain
Yeah.
joints. Maybe based off injury history, based off of that test. Okay, we know the right side has this 15%, deficiency or asymmetry between the left side. Let's dig a little bit deeper locally on this right side. Is it ankle? Is it knee? Is it hip? Is it something that's more up the chain? And then address it locally and then come back and see if we had changed things more globally, right? Did we have that actual adaptation occur, and did that adaptation make any changes? Did that transfer into this more global test that we value?
Yeah, and that's the thing that I would say is the slowest process is trying to tease that out, right? Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, you're not pulling them from the court because you see something. And so therefore, chances are whatever compensatory patterns or whatever, specific deficiency might be there, they're going to go back out to the court and jam it up again. And so it's up to us to make it consistent in terms of the treatments that we're providing, in terms of the stimulus that we're providing, to try to tease that out over a season. And it's really difficult when they're
Yeah.
playing 82 games and practicing. I mean, that would be something that I think most people even in college or other professional settings run into is at the end of the day we have to play the sport that we are there to play. And so how can we play the long game here, right? I think that's the hard thing is we want to see these results quick. We want to see these results to make us feel better as practitioners. But the reality is this might be over a career. This might be over a 5-year period. This might be a year. And so just trying to be realistic about where our goals are and trying to remind the athlete that this is monotonous work, but in the end, hopefully, we will start to see you trending in the right direction.
Yeah, I like what you said there, hopefully, because you're like, we think that this is our best educated guess at the end of the day. Like, we really don't know what's going to happen. But I also like how you said that even if you identify these asymmetries, it's not panic button. It's, hey, you still got to go play your sport, and we're going to do what we can to make sure this doesn't balloon into something bigger and this causes an injury. But we're going to slowly chip away at this asymmetry when we have the time, when we're able to get in and work with you. And I can totally appreciate that with the 82 game schedule, being on the road, that it's not always so easy to do that. And it brings up this point which we talked about earlier, which is like it's really important that you have the resources when you're on the road from other organizations to all work together, to keep everybody healthy, number one, and to make sure there's a good product on the court.
Yeah, and that's the thing too is I think earlier in my career I was like super protective of my athletes, meaning, thinking that they would be there forever, right? And the reality is players are trading teams, players are, coming and going. And so one thing that I try to just relay to them that helps with the buy-in is let's just add I believe adding this to your tool belt will help you for your career. Do I want you to stay here with the Jazz forever? Absolutely. I think you're a great person. I think you're, an incredible basketball player, but the chances of that happening are very unlikely. So while you're here, how about we add this to your tool belt? And then inversely, if it's a veteran, one of the best things that I think I can do is just learn from them. What did you do that worked? What did chances are I know their strength coach, so I'm going to reach out to them and say, what did this guy like to do? What didn't he like to do? How can I tease that out from our program? But also, one of the first steps if we sign a free agent or somebody that's been around the league is really try to obtain as much information about them before they even step foot in the building from prior coaches and things like that. And then also letting them know that I'm not going to shove anything down their throat that they don't want, but also at the same time, chances are there is something that we can add to your tool belt. And then that way, at the end of your long, I want everybody to play 10 plus years in the league, even more, right? That would be a huge goal for each of my athletes that come through our door. And so the ability for us to maybe help them in whatever manner, that's what our goals are, is to just try to add something to their tool belt that they might not have had before.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. And a lot of great nuggets in there, and I really appreciate it. I know it's draft day, so I know you're a busy guy today and don't have too much more time for us. I just have a few quick questions that are more fun questions for you as we wrap up this conversation. Sound good?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. Quick question. Favorite piece of Keiser equipment?
I really love the functional trainer. I think it's versatile. I think the biggest thing is we got to share a locker room, weight room with the hockey team now, and so just how they use it and what they're looking for, things like that, I think is really important. But we've always kind of had one or two of those in our facilities, and especially now the user interface and some of the updates that you guys have done, like the athletes really want to see the bars right away, right? And so
Mhm.
I had some of your functional trainers before, and we're looking for the numbers, and maybe the players don't really know what to look for, but when you have that instantaneous feedback, the it really helps the buy-in from the user perspective. They can just kind of, we're done with the set, boom, what did it look like? Was there a fatigue there? What did that look like? And so I think it's, one of the things that we would utilize the most.
Yeah, awesome. I always ask people this because I'm always curious. I'm a big foodie. What's your favorite food spot in Salt Lake City?
Favorite food spot is Manoli's. So it's this Greek restaurant. It's got probably 20 tables in there. It's a little smaller, but the quality is amazing. I've gotten to know the owner of the restaurant over maybe the last 5 to 10 years. He started as a caterer and now he's opened this beautiful restaurant. He flies in most of his stuff from Greece and from some of the vendors that he has back at home. So you can it's like, where else can you get octopus in Salt Lake City that I'm gonna trust? It's got to be at Manoli's. And just they make homemade desserts. So every time it's sort of a special occasion for my wife and I to go there, but that's by far my favorite restaurant.
I love it. Next time you're in Chicago, when you guys come play the Bulls, I'm nearby. Let's go get some good Greek food. We got a ton of that in Chicago. So,
I can't wait.
yeah, right by the United Center, too. So, it's great. On that note, favorite NBA city to travel to and why?
Mm. Uh, It's changed over the years. I think being from Salt Lake City and being a Utah guy, I'm used to smaller cities and not so much busy of the lifestyle and stuff. But I love Toronto. I think, some of the different cultures that are represented there, I think is amazing. I think, it's a beautiful city. It's just slowly become one of my favorites. I feel like if there's any type of food that have a craving for or something like that, like you can find it in Toronto. I think everybody's really, the people of Canada are great and that area specifically. So right now it's Toronto, but it always changes.
Yeah, we need to get a team back in Seattle. I think that would be awesome.
We had a preseason game there 2 years ago, and I hadn't been to Seattle in probably 15 years. And I think, it was fun to just kind of see how many fans showed up. I think they are dying for a team to return there. And then not to mention, the fan base that the NFL and the MLS have up there with the Sounders and the Seahawks. Like it's due time to hopefully get a team up there.
They need to have the Sonics need to come back for sure. Super passionate fan base, absolutely. Okay, last question. Favorite player you've gotten to watch from the opposing bench?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Dirk Nowitzki.
Really? Oh,
It's hard.
it's a tough
Um,
question. I know. I saved the
that's a
hardest
tough
question for
question.
last.
That is tough. I'm gonna go with Dirk, and the reason being is, to me, he had fun. He figured out ways to, craft his abilities, but also, you know, there's a moment that stands out that maybe this skewed my view, but I remember being a team attendant, and I never really was like in awe of anybody. I never really felt starstruck when I was 16, 17. I was there for a job, and that's what I was there for. But I remember one time he walked out, and for whatever reason, I just didn't realize, God, he's so big, and his
Right.
shot and just, the way that he moved was it was just really like he to me really struck me as somewhat of a unicorn of the time. And so I remember he walked out, and for whatever reason, I just was staring at him, kind of almost like staring through him. And he stops at the free throw line and he goes, "Hey, buddy." And kind of totally put me on the spot. And ever since then, I would see him in the locker room, and he's just a great guy. I think overall too, his if you ask anybody within that organization, there's a reason why they want to keep him around, and why he keeps close to Dallas Mavericks is because he's a great personality. He's a leader by example. He is committed to the people that he works with, and I know that the staff that have worked with him said that he's just a real incredible guy. So I'll go with Dirk right now.
That's a great answer. I love that one. I wasn't expecting Dirk, but I mean, talk about European skill, ahead of its time. So
Yeah, yeah, I think more than anything, maybe that's what it was just he's somewhat of a unicorn where he was ahead of his time. Now we're afforded to see all these different international players, but definitely at the time, he was one of the first where I got to see up close and personal, and it was like, wow, no wonder he's as successful as he is, because he just has an incredible approach to everything.
growing up a lifelong Bulls fan, we had Derrick Rose here. I obviously got to see him in person a lot, but every time you got to see Derrick Rose in person, it was like such a treat. And this city too is like dying for an athlete like that. And that was super cool. One other one I saw this year, went to Bulls Spurs this year. I had to go see Wembayama. Oh my God. Like
Right?
I felt like I was watching a different sport.
Yeah.
Whenever he had the ball, and that was super cool. So, really amazing to just see the different talent across the league right now. I think it's a really exciting time. So,
It's yeah, very exciting time, and it's only getting better. And to your point, when you see when you get an opportunity to see some of these athletes up close, and you realize just how big they are, but just how skilled they are, I think that's what even wows me even more, is just, you know, Wembanyama, he moves like a guard, and he's bigger than anybody else. That is unique in its own, but then not to mention, just his approach to the game and his approach to taking care of his body as a professional is something admirable as well.
I don't remember the last time. I've been around sports a long time, right? The days of being like in awe or jaw dropped by an athlete, those that was a long time ago. And now I saw him in person this year, and I was kind of like, wow, this is truly incredible. And then you go see him like playing chess in New York, with the everyday people in the park. So I was like, this is a cool athlete.
I think you said it. I love when we get to see the human side of our
Yeah,
athletes, right? And I think sometimes they haven't been afforded that opportunity to share that with everybody. So I'm hoping, with this generation, they all have great personalities, they all have great backgrounds. And so it's fun when we get to, with social media and stuff, we get to see another side of them.
yeah. Yeah, very cool. Well, Isaiah Wright of the Utah Jazz, thank you so much for joining me today and chopping it up on the Keiser Human Performance Podcast. If you're listening in today and want to stay up to date on Isaiah, you can connect with him on LinkedIn and make sure to give him a follow at Coach Wright. Wright is with a W, 01. On behalf of Keiser, wishing you and the Jazz a wonderful and very fortunate NBA draft night and the best of luck next season and beyond. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gabe. I appreciate you, buddy.